Hello horror hounds, and welcome back to our look through the films of David Cronenberg, and we've reached Videodrome. Just as Tenebrae was Dario Argento's riposte to his detractors, I think Videodrome is also a sly rejoinder to Cronenberg's own critics, who has decided with this film to take them at face value. What if TV and movie violence really did desensitize viewers? What if it really was bad for your mental state? What if violent films did make people violent? What if video nasties really were nasty? What if they bite? It's Videodrome.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
In Videodrome, low-life TV operator Max Wren discovers a snuff TV broadcast called Videodrome. But Videodrome is more than just a TV show. It's an experiment that uses regular TV transmissions to alter the brain and perception of its viewers. The truth behind the Videodrome transmissions is mind-bending, and Videodrome is one of Cronenberg's most mind-bending films. I'd argue that Videodrome is Cronenberg's first bona fide masterpiece. Getting back into his groove makes me theorize a little bit about why the preceding film Scanners didn't work beyond being rushed into production. Scanners, to my mind, didn't quite work as a David Cronenberg movie because it wasn't erotic. His other films have had a clear element of eroticism to their philosophy, and Videodrome is perhaps the most erotic film he'd made up to this point. Now, I'm not talking about sex here per se, otherwise Shivers, with its cast of sex maniacs, would clearly outstrip the rest of his oeuvre until perhaps Crash. But Videodrome mixes its fine seam of paranoia with an erotic hum that is undeniable, and when you watch the films back to back, was undeniably lacking in Scanners. One thing we can say with absolute certainty now, at this point in his career, having looked at his films chronologically, is that David Cronenberg has now lifted his curse of the bland leading man. He could gain access to actors at this point and resources that he could have only dreamt of back in the mid-1970s. Videodrome was his most expensive film at that point. It had a $6 million budget, which was almost double that of Scanners. You can see that in terms of how technically complicated it is, how technically intricate it is, but also in the fact that he is now able to pony up for a really effective leading man. Up until this point, he's sort of bolstered some really bland and ineffectual leading men with really interesting cameos and character actors. Now, front and center, James Woods, as Max Wren, reality and fiction. James Woods as Max Wren is charismatic, engaging. He is a screen presence, and he is absolutely perfect for the scuzzy, down at heels, sleazy, increasingly paranoid character that is at the center of the Videodrome maelstrom. No one really does scuzzy sleaze quite like James Woods. Of course, one of the calling cards of Videodrome are the practical special effects, whereas previously the effects would be bullet points or punctuation in his films. I'm thinking specifically about the very end of The Brood or the head explosion in Scanners. Here, with more money to play with, he's able to seed these visions throughout the entire film. And it is about a man whose perception of reality is breaking down, or at least changing, and the things he sees, and the easy slide between reality and hallucination or hyperreality. The film's visual effects were designed by Rick Baker, and Baker is rightly lauded for his groundbreaking effects work in 1981's An American Werewolf in London. I'd argue that he pushed the envelope more in Videodrome. I'll be honest, until I started putting my notes together for this, I'd completely forgotten that Rick Baker was responsible for the astounding glut of images that weave their way through Videodrome. Watching it again after so many years, I was genuinely struck by how effective and affecting it still is. There's one slight thing, I think, which stops this from being an absolutely perfect movie in my eyes. It's the speed in the final act with which Max Wren is programmed by Videodrome into being an assassin, and then instantly deprogrammed by Bianca Oblivion, and to embrace this idea of the new flesh. All of that third act happens in such a mad tumble and rush, and there's no pause to really take in the switching of allegiances, the programming, the deprogramming, reprogramming, and what's going on. You might argue that it all adds to the final sort of orgasmic almost release of surreal visions and metamorphosis that the film is going towards, and you might really like that tumble into messiness, really messy storytelling. A couple more beats, a couple more pauses before the rush to the end, I think could have benefited the movie. I think also with the character of Professor Brian Oblivion, you can start to see more overtly the cues that Cronenberg takes from a writer like William Burroughs. Brian Oblivion would, with his pronouncements, would really happily sit anywhere within Burroughs' Naked Lunch novel, and a lot of the ooky fleshiness of Videodrome will find its way into later works, which I think are also Burroughs influenced, like Existence, and of course Naked Lunch, which is based on Burroughs' own novel. But Cronenberg's evolving himself here as a writer and a filmmaker. He's moving from shady corporations to shadowy political movements, which I think suits his sensibilities much better. The more cerebral these large background forces become in his worlds, the scarier they become. We can all get on board with the notion of a keloid clinic that might not have our best interests at heart, but an underground movement with a philosophy which might already be insinuating itself into your life ups the paranoia and the threat significantly. One of the things that really impressed me on my rewatch of Videodrome is how vibrant and vital it still is, because let's be honest, all of the technology that's at play here in Videodrome is horrifically obsolete. I mean, Videodrome was a film of its time and place. It really rode the TV boom, and it really rode the VHS home movie viewing boom. So at the time, the images of the tapes and the cathode ray TVs and satellite TV and all of those, the growing plethora of channels there at your disposal, and specialist channels and adult channels and the like, really would have seemed of its time. It should all seem obsolete now, but somehow doesn't. Are there any other films apart from Videodrome and Ringu which imbue a humble videotape with such anxiety and apprehension? Off the top of my head, I can only also think of the anonymous videotapes that Patricia Arquette and Bill Pullman receive in David Lynch's Lost Highway. Are there any other VHS tape moments out there in all of movies that you can remind me of down in the comments below? There are a lot of reviews that say that Videodrome is still current because Cronenberg managed to successfully predict so many things about the future of media. I don't want to make too much hay out of that. Sure, there are bits and pieces here and there. If you squint, you can kind of see virtual reality. You can see Alexa and Siri in there a little bit. The rise of social media and the social media influencers is certainly in the form of Professor Brian Oblivion. He does seem to have, by happy accident, stumbled across that. But I don't think this was intentionally prophetic by any means. Cronenberg's always played fast and loose with his technology. They've always been a means to an end. Gaming in existence only tangentially resembles gaming in real life. It's the ideas he fuses with the tech which keeps his stories fresh. Granted though, despite the tech being extremely obsolete now, it's very easily mentally, while you're watching Videodrome in the 21st century, to shift from TV to media, online, social media, whilst watching the film, and some of its messages do remain remarkably apposite. Watching Cronenberg's films in order has led me to the conclusion that Videodrome is the first perfect distillation of all his obsessions or kinks or whatever you want to call them. Sex and eroticism as something slightly different, mutation, technology, rebirth, violence, religion or / politics or cults, power structures, the functions of technology, violence in society and media, sexual repression, body horror, hallucination, paranoia, displacement. What we have in Videodrome is a dwarf star of all of his obsessions and interests, a perfect metaphor, a perfect synthesis of everything that he seems to have been striving towards saying as a storyteller up to that point. Black Mirror wishes it could produce something as dense with meaning about the merging of the physical and the technological as Videodrome did. These elements all now combined in one film, Cronenberg will tease out again and explore more microscopically in later films, in isolation, all the way through to his non-horror or sci-fi films like Crash, Spider, and Butterfly, A History of Violence, Cosmopolis. But Videodrome is the one film that could possibly act as a Cronenbergian manifesto. If you want to understand what he was striving towards with his earlier films, watch Videodrome. If you want to understand where he's coming from with seemingly obtuse works like Crash or Cosmopolis, watch Videodrome. It's rare for a director to so perfectly encapsulate their vision inside of one film. I think maybe Kubrick did it in 2001, Spielberg, 80s Spielberg with E.T., Argento with Suspiria, maybe Ridley Scott with Blade Runner, David Lynch certainly with Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me. Let me know any other films in the comments of directors who seem to have successfully expressed their, at least for the time, manifesto perfectly encapsulated within one film. But for David Cronenberg, Videodrome is it.